about what you can do to build a campaign to ensure that the money of your members isn't funding bloodshed. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Can I have a formal seconder for motion 115? Formally seconded. Thank you. I now open the floor to any other contributors who want to come into the debate. Please state your union, who you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Jahan Al-Azawi, EIS, first-time delegate and speaker. Thank you. I commend all the trade unions that are here today who've released statements and adopted motions in support of Palestine since the genocide commenced in October and throughout history. The motions that were proposed for this Congress reflect the breadth of support that Scottish trade unions have for Palestine. My union, the EIS, has contributed tens of thousands of pounds to medical relief in Gaza. We've also produced our own teaching resource that adopts a rights-based approach to teaching Israel-Palestine, which we have sent out to all schools in Scotland. We've also written to all directors of education to encourage their schools and their locality to use this EIS resource. And whilst one doesn't have to know the whole history of this conflict to oppose genocide, if we're to be effective in our opposition, we need to understand the history as well as the contemporary reality of Israel's occupation of Palestine, as well as the complicity of ours and other governments around the world. Education has an important role to play here, and I'm proud that EIS is leading those efforts to educate for historical understanding and future peace building. Congress, I'd also like to encourage us to think beyond our reaffirmations, our condemnation, our calls for bans on this and that, but also to think more specifically about the actions that we can take. We've built a strong basis of activism, but we're organisers at our core, and I welcome the Congress's call for a special conference where we can discuss and build on the strategy so that when the bombs stop, we continue to advocate and campaign for an end to the occupation and a two-state solution so that that actually becomes more than just a rallying cry, but an actual reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Just a reminder to people coming up to speak that if your organisation's already spoken, you won't get in a second time into the debate. Call the next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Chair, Conference. This is going to be very brief, because I spent an hour and a half last night writing it.
Who are you, Jim?
Oh,
Tell
sorry,
us.
Jim Simons, National Union journalist. And the ambassadors have covered 3/4 of what I was going to say today. So, first and foremost, I'm sure you're all aware of the tragedy yesterday when two mass graves were found, one below the Al-Shifa Hospital and one at Beit Lanya. Now, Palestine is a country which has been under occupation for 75 years, the year before I was born, and they've been getting away with the Israelis have been getting away with it ever since. And from my point of view, I must point out that there's been 177 United Nations workers have been murdered. We all know there's 1.5 million displaced people in Rafah as we speak. And Palestinian journalists are being killed on a daily basis because there is no journalists allowed in Palestine, which kind of kills everything. We ourselves as journalists have lost 140 members, and there's even more media staff than that have been either killed or their families have been burned out their houses and tortured and goodness knows what. Friends, I'm just going to finish this by saying to you, I pray for the day that Netanyahu is dragged screaming and kicking to the Court of Human Rights in The Hague. I hope it happens, and I hope it happens soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Next speaker.
President Congress, Stuart Graham, Unison Scotland, speaking in support of the statement. Congress, we know that the STUC has significant policy on Palestine, so we're not going from a standing start here, but we're building on what we've created so far. But clearly what we've created so far hasn't been sufficient. I thank one of my colleagues, Tony, for directing me to a quote from the Scotsman that gives maybe a more applicable example for folk from Scotland of how narrow Gaza has now become. So in a confined space smaller than the island of Arran, more than 2 million people from a population of 2.5 million have been displaced from their homes, which in many cases have been turned to rubble. I'm going to add to that though. So if you can think about the island of Arran, now imagine populations of Dundee, Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Glasgow and North and South Lanarkshire, all squeezed onto Arran, no electricity, very little water and nowhere near enough food. And that's the type of situation we're talking about. I think that's an important image for everyone to consider. As of last week, almost 500 healthcare workers have now been killed in Palestine. That's probably about 2.5 times the number of people that are in the room right now. We could imagine the amount of people that just disappeared over the course of that. They're all workers. What's our response? That's more than the total number of healthcare worker deaths across all countries in conflict in 2021 and 2022. And we saw the additional numbers of journalists, firefighters and other workers, UNRWA workers, that have pushed that number up to over 2,000 from the colleagues from Palestine. And we've got International Workers' Memorial Day on the 28th of April. Remember the dead and fight like hell for the living. It's never been a more stark example of the internationalism that needs to be present at International Workers' Memorial Day this year. And this cannot, we always talk about International Workers' Memorial Day being something that we need to continue throughout the course of the year, and it can't just be on the 28th of April. I think it's incumbent upon us all now to incorporate that strategy into how we approach Palestine too. Current and past targeting of healthcare infrastructure is genocidal. Unison was one of the first unions to demand an immediate ceasefire, and within Unison itself, Unison Scotland was the first body within the union to put out a position on Palestine at the start of December last year, our Scottish Council. This came from our membership, it came from my branch, but it was supported unanimously by Unison Scottish Council, therefore from below, and it's a collective demand of the union in response to what people are witnessing daily on TV, social media. Unison will be participating in the healthcare vigils and weekly demonstrations, but
Finish
we
off,
need
please, come.
more visibility. Okay. This is about visibility. This is about supporting workers, particularly, and spreading into the arms sector. But we want to support you in the arms sector. We want to take advantage of this moment right now to make sure that Palestine is free. Please support the statement.
Thank you, Delegate. Next speaker.
Congress, Sylvia Stewart, United Union, speaking in support of the General Council statement in Palestine. Since October 7th last year, at least 34,000 Palestinians have been killed, at least 77,000 wounded and 1.7 million displaced. Of the 34,000 dead, at least 14,000 of those were children. And UNICEF has also reported that child deaths in Gaza are also as a result of disease and starvation. We've heard today of the horrific death statistics of medical staff and firefighters and other workers. And we cannot condone, sympathise or support the actions of Israel in killing innocent civilians under any circumstances, because human lives matter. The abhorrent acts of Hamas do not justify the actions of Israel. Genocidal actions are being carried out across Palestine, and human beings have been denied food, water and shelter, the very basic necessities to sustain life. Collective punishment by the Israel government needs to be answerable, and Israel must be held accountable for their actions in the bombings and destruction of schools, hospitals, homes and communities. We have to build further support, campaign and lobby for an immediate ceasefire, and we need this locally, regionally, nationally and internationally. Unite the Union has a policy on Palestine, and we endorse the General Council statement because it aligns with our policy in many respects. We need to exert influence on the international trade union federations to which Unite and our trade union sisters are affiliates. We need to build wider and stronger support as well as international solidarity with the Palestinian people. Now more than ever is the time to do more. We must give what we can and do what we can, particularly those in positions of authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Final speaker, please.
President in Congress, Jeanette Finlay, UCU, Scotland. We're speaking in support of the General Council statement, and the General Secretary was right that what's important here most of all is unity around what action we're going to take. Now, we've got members working in areas that may leave them at risk of being complicit in the genocide. Members working in science, engineering, computer science, other areas. We've got members already asking how they'll be protected if they refuse to be complicit in the genocide. And we need to send a message from this Congress that individual unions will cooperate to provide an answer to that, and that such action will have the support of the entire movement. Now, my union wanted to bring an emergency resolution to Congress to call for action to prevent military planes using Prestwick. We were unable to do that, but I think that's an example where workers at Prestwick and the rest of the movement can cooperate to take immediate action. And if anybody needs me to lie on a runway, then, you know, I'll be up for that. But there can be no delay in this, because there's no delay in the operation of the genocide by Israel. There's no time to wait. I was given the happy news recently that I'm going to be a granny, and I'm sure many of you have felt the same. Oh, thanks. I'm sure many of you have felt the same when such major life events happen in your family. It's made me more determined to try to leave a better world behind. And we all need to play a part in creating a better world for all of the babies of the future. And that time is now. We need to do it. We need to move quick. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Thank you, all the speakers, everybody that's played a part in this whole session. You've done great credit to your movement, and we should be proud of the role that this movement has played. And we now move on to vote on the General Council statement on Palestine. Can I see all those in favour? Can I see all those against? Thank you. Any abstentions? That is carried overwhelmingly. Thank you. I was holding myself back then. I'm the president. Stop it. Get on with it, Mike. Call on motion 116, support for Ukrainian trade unions and affiliation to the Ukrainian Solidarity Campaign Scotland, moved by Dumfries and Galloway Trade Union Council.
John Dennis, Dumfries and Galloway Trade Union Council. Congress, unlike in Palestine, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine is not at all helpful for the Ukrainian trade union movement. In fact, it amounts to appeasement, as at the very least it would permanently confirm Russia's brutal occupation of Ukrainian territories it invaded in 2022. Vladimir Putin is aiming to re-establish Russian hegemony over all the territories that used to form the old Russian Empire, no matter what the people who live in these lands want. He's happy to back up corrupt, vicious tyrants like Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus and Assad in Syria. He has deliberately stirred up and armed extreme Russian nationalist movements and sent troops to invade first in the South Ossetia and Abkhazia regions of Georgia in 2008, then in the Donbass and the Crimea in 2014, and in Transnistria region of Moldova in 2022. We can see the nature of Putin's Russia by the suppression of all media that criticises the state. the long prison sentences for opponents of the war, the murder of Alexei Navalny, and the banning of all anti-war candidates from the recent farce that they call a presidential election in Russia. There are no free independent trade unions in Russia. Ukraine's trade unions are free to criticise their government and often do so, for example, over Zelensky's support for Israel. Both the KVPU and the FPU trade union federations, though, strongly support the Ukrainian government's armed resistance to the Russian invasion. They recognise that Ukraine needs sophisticated defensive weapons to prevent mass casualties among the civilian population in its cities from the mass barrage of missiles and drones, many supplied by Iran and North Korea. They know that such expensive weapons can only be supplied by the USA and European governments. Whatever we may think of NATO as a nuclear alliance, that is the reality that they face. They also need huge quantities of artillery shells to defend their front line and eventually, hopefully, liberate the territories seized by Russia with appalling brutality. Anyone who doubts that should make a point of watching 20 Days in Mariupol. Harrowing scenes in it show the casualties caused by the deliberate shelling of a clearly marked maternity hospital. According to Human Rights Watch, well over 8,000 civilians were killed by deliberate shelling there, although they recognise that the true figure is a whole lot higher. The Ukraine Solidarity Campaign in Scotland was only established in April 2023. To date, it has affiliations from 2 trade union councils, Unison, Scottish Council and several union branches, as well as many individual members, some from the 3 left parties, each of the 3 left of centre parties in Scotland. We're looking to expand that by making the case for solidarity with Ukrainian trade unions through spreading news and information from the KVPU and FPU and Ukrainian socialists using our website and Facebook page. We've distributed the Ukrainian Socialists Commons leaflet on Palestine at demos in Edinburgh, Dundee and Dumfries, and many of you got a version of that leaflet this morning. In practical terms, we also cooperate with left-leaning Ukrainian organisations in the UK in raising money and sending aid, usually in the form of medical supplies, which are so often in short supply. Thanks to the fat old criminal in Mar-a-Lago in Florida and his Republican stooges in Congress blocking UK military aid, Ukraine's struggle for national liberation is in crisis at the moment. We need to pass this motion and use it to build solidarity with Ukraine. Every little bit of good news gets passed on to Ukrainian trade unionists in their workplaces and on the front line. Please support the motion and let's grow trade union solidarity with the free trade unions of Ukraine.
Thank you, delegates. Can we have a seconder for the motion, please?
President, Congress, Tony Calleary, Unison Scotland, supporting motion 116, Ukraine, support for Ukrainian trade unions and affiliation to the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign Scotland. This motion calls on Congress to reaffirm its support for the free trade union federations in the Ukraine. I'll also ask Congress and affiliates to consider affiliating to the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign Scotland. Now, neither of these are massive requests and should simply be considered as a starting point for building solidarity with Ukraine. Unison took the decision to affiliate to the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign Scotland some time ago. And in fact, on the back of that, we've been reaching out to public sector trade unions in the Ukraine. Our last Scottish Council meeting on the 6th of April, with a live video link to Ukraine, to hear a presentation and short video from Ivana Kravko. Now, Ivana is the chair of the Youth Department of the FPU, the Ukrainian State Employees Union. We found this to be both very thought-provoking and very enlightening. But at the end of all this, building solidarity at all levels should and must always be a trade union priority. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Now open to other delegates coming to the debate. Please state whether you're supporting or opposing.
President, Congress, Nathan Hennebury, Clydebank Trade Union Council, speaking in opposition to this motion. The Ukraine Solidarity Campaign, at its face, seems like a solidarity network which puts the interests of the Ukrainian working class first. Sadly, this is not the case. The Russian-Ukraine conflict is an inter-imperialist struggle, fuelled, driven and accelerated by NATO and our allies in its attempts of engaging and heightening a proxy war against Russia and China. Rather than calling for peace, the Tory government and other elements of the ruling class continue the war drive within the region. The USC toes this imperialistic line under the guise of national liberation. The continuation of so-called military aid into the region is one of the key principles in which this group organises around. This Congress and the trade union movement as a whole must strive for peace. We've done so in the past, especially in Ukraine and Russia. What I hold in my hand is a pamphlet made by fellow trade unionists who explored Ukraine after the Second World War, after the devastation that Ukraine felt at the hands of a fascist empire. These trade unionists talk to workers in the workplace, in the streets and at local sanatoriums. The number one question asked by the Ukrainian people in this pamphlet is, what are the people of Scotland doing for peace? The American, British and European war hawks have worked tirelessly to ensure that war continues in the region. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister at the time, thwarted attempts made by China and other nations in securing a negotiated peace settlement to the conflict. By supporting a continued drive to this war and affiliating to organisations who do the same, we become the pawns of men like Boris Johnson and Joe Biden. We become the pawns of the warlords of Lockheed Martin, BAE Systems and General Dynamics, leaving us complicit in the war crimes committed in the region. In July, a NATO summit will convene, where a key decision on whether NATO and its allies mobilise to enter the war in Ukraine with soldiers touching down in Ukrainian soil. And I tell you, this conference, I hope those who have chosen to support groups such as the USC are prepared to be held to account alongside the war hawks, the Tory government and the imperialist profiteers who have used the Ukrainian working class as simple cannon fodder in their proxy war campaign. If the NATO intervention goes ahead, will we be able to look our members in the eyes as war spills across Europe, as we cower in bomb shelters, or some of us conscripted to the front lines? Can we look our members in the eyes and tell them, I done all I could for peace? Please oppose this motion.
Thank you, Delegate. Call on the next speaker in the debate.
Arthur West, East Ayrshire Trade Union Council, speaking against opposing motion 116. I'm well aware of the sensitivities and respect that requires to be shown when you're making remarks about a dreadful war which has killed many thousands of people on both sides. Tragically, many of them are young people who were just starting out in their lives. Our Trades Council have particular difficulties with the second paragraph of this motion, which calls for Congress to regard the war in Ukraine as a struggle for national liberation. Now, people who hold that view are entitled to that view. However, it seems to our Trades Council that this tragic and bloody war has to be looked at in a wider context. Recently, the world lost John Pilger, a respected and principled journalist who wrote and broadcast with distinction on international affairs. One of the points Pilger made a few times was that when looking at international issues, it was useful to look back at recent history, as it could help give an understanding of the present situation. Now, we are and this seems inadequate to say this now, we are tragically where we are in relation to the war in Ukraine. However, our Trades Council would suggest that if you look back at recent history, there is a very respectable case to suggest that reckless expansion of NATO and the losing of the opportunity in the early 2000s at the end of the Cold War to replace NATO with a security organisation which was based in dialogue and cooperation across Europe, that's been a contributory factor to the tragic war that we are now seeing. It's also the view of our Trade Union Council that the best way to show solidarity with Ukraine and to help the working class people who are getting killed in their thousands because of this war is to bring about a negotiated settlement to the dreadful war and stopping the killing which is going on. Our Trade Council would suggest, rather than passing this motion, the trade union movement should be developing a strategy based on the following points. Looking back at recent history and previous discussions, such as the 2015 Minsk agreements and peace talks, allegedly scuppered by Boris Johnson, but there's clear evidence that he did that. Look back, the purpose of looking back is to find if there are any elements of these discussions which could be used to help us develop a peaceful solution. That's not an unknown tactic in the trade union world. Also, utilise ideas from the wider international community in the possible achievement of the end of this war, and establish clear access to enable United Nations agencies and others to provide humanitarian aid. The last surviving World War soldier, Harry Patch, was a very interesting character. Before he passed away in 2009, he was quoted as saying, "War's always finished with both sitting down and talking. Why the devil don't they do that beforehand?" East Ayrshire, please oppose the motion.
Thanks, Delegate. I now offer Dumfries and Galloway the right to reply.
Right, we have the old canards that Boris Johnson scuppered peace talks in April 2023. It just isn't true that Boris Johnson had that amount of influence on Ukraine. In March 2022, the Ukrainians who had successfully repulsed the Russian attacks uncovered the Bucha massacre, where 1,400 people had been killed, among them 37 children. They also were well aware that in the siege of Mariupol, they had a ceasefire agreed with Putin, brokered by the Red Cross, and when the column of civilians attempted to exit the city, they were fired upon by the Russian troops. That's the reason, the real reason, why the peace talks were scuppered at that time. Nothing to do with Boris Johnson. It was because the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people, did not trust anything that Putin said. This question of Boris Johnson and so on first was quoted in the European Conservative magazine, quoting a conservative European politician. Putin also made that claim in February 2024, so much for the reputable source that came from. If you believe Putin, you believe anybody. Basically, saying that it's a proxy war fought on behalf of NATO flies in the face of the truth, because the truth is that in February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia committed massive atrocities against the Ukrainian people. That is why it is a war of national liberation. It's a war to get rid of Russia out of Ukrainian territory, and it's supported in that by the Ukrainian trade union movement and the vast majority of Ukrainian people. I ask you to support the motion.
Thank you, Delegate. We now move on to the vote to advise Congress that the General Council is recommending support for motion 116. Can I see all those in favour, please? Can I see all those against? Can I see any abstentions? That motion is carried. Thank you. Now move on to motion 117, International Brigade Memorial Trust, to be moved by Aberdeen Trade Union Council.
Thank you, President. Congress, Scott Sutherland, Aberdeen Trade Union Council, moving motion 117 on the International Brigade Memorial Trust. The International Brigades and the fight against fascism from the 1930s have lessons for today. Many of these working class anti-fascists were also trade unionists. They displayed extraordinary bravery by fighting to defend the democratically elected Spanish government. The Brigaders stood and fought with the Spanish people against the Nazis and the rise of poisonous fascism. A strong message of working class resistance was sent to Franco, Hitler and Mussolini. Progressive historians recognise that the non-intervention policy agreed by Britain and its allies allowed Franco to defeat the Democratic Popular Front government and subject the Spanish people to a reactionary fascist dictatorship for 40 years. Appeasement and non-intervention paved the way for Hitler and Mussolini to invade other countries, which contributed to the rise of World War II. However, as the late Bob Cooney, one of Aberdeen's international brigaders, clarified, the lessons learned on the battlefields of Spain helped to defeat Hitler, Mussolini and fascism. Congress, please note that all the international brigaders have now sadly passed away. We applaud the International Brigade Memorial Trust for keeping up the profile of the Spanish Civil War and fight against fascism. With this in mind, Aberdeen Trade Union Council call on the STUC General Council to attempt to enter into a dialogue with the Scottish Government and appropriate trade unions with a view to the incorporation of the history of anti-fascism, the International Brigades and the Spanish Civil War across the education sector, including schools, colleges and universities, which I think is being done in Wales at the moment. We ask Congress to note that the year 2026 will mark the 90th anniversary of the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War. We would ask the STUC General Council, in conjunction with the Black Workers Committee, to incorporate this fact into plans for the year 2026, including any plans for St Andrew's Day anti-racist and anti-fascist marches and rallies. Finally, with the ideology of fascism on the rise again, it becomes more important than ever to ensure that the history of the international brigades features prominently in the Scottish education system. We must promote and defend trade union organisation, human rights and democracy. Modern-day Nazis and fascists continue to violently espouse their poisonous views. We must oppose them comprehensively. And just to conclude, socialism, movement of hope; fascism, movement of despair. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate. Can I have a seconder, please?
President, Congress, Tony Colery, Units of Scotland, seconding motion 117, International Brigade Memorial Trust. The Spanish Civil War began in 1936, almost 90 years ago. Many turned a blind eye to what was unfolding, but socialists and trade unionists from across the world spoke out against the overthrow of a democratic government. In fact, 2,500 people from across Britain and Ireland went one step further and joined the International Brigade to fight fascism and defend democracy. The least we as trade unionists can do today is to raise our voices to promote the approaching anniversary. We need to do all we can to ensure the efforts of our comrades are brought back into the spotlight and not forgotten. I'd like to remind Congress of another approaching anniversary this year. From the 2nd to the 3rd of December this year will be the 40th anniversary of the Bhopal gas disaster. Now, on the night of the 2nd of December 1984, the Union Carbide plant in Bhopal allowed around 30 tonnes of a gas, methyl isocyanate, to be released into the air. Now, methyl isocyanate is approximately 50 times more deadly than cyanide and is unfortunately heavier than air. The number of people who died following the incident will never be known, but it's estimated at least 25,000 people died in the immediacy of the leak, and that well over 100,000 people, perhaps many hundreds of thousands, are impacted today. This situation isn't improving. In fact, it's getting worse, as there's never been any decontamination. So please don't forget Bhopal. Please don't forget the International Brigade. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you for that very tenuous seconding. Supportive speakers? Anybody speaking in support?
Anne Coulthart, National Union of Journalists. My union has no position on memorials. Neither do I, actually. I'm not wild about them. But I wanted to speak on behalf of an old friend of mine who would be alive, if he were alive, would be more than 100 years old. He joined the International Brigades as a teenager. He was an East End Jew who was also, would have been stricken by the debate that we've had this afternoon about Gaza, Israel, Palestine. He was tempted to in 1969, I think, have I got the date right? The war that happened in that part of the world, where, as an East End Jew who was horrified by what happened during the Holocaust, but was also a Jewish Marxist, communist, socialist, and he did not know what to do about what was happening in Israel, Palestine, because he was torn in every way. And if he'd heard the debate today, I'm sure he would have been torn too, because there are Israelis, as we all know, who desperately want, very close ties with people in Gaza and Palestinians everywhere. So I just wanted to, as a personal thing, and I'm sorry for taking the time, because my union has no position on, I'm sorry, on memorials, neither do I. Sorry.
Don't tell us, tell your union. Next speaker, please.
Hello, Congress, Sean McNamara, EIS, speaking in support of this motion. President, comrades, as I've said, a member of the EIS. We are an affiliated member of the International Brigade Memorial Trust, and I want to speak specifically to the third paragraph here that asks for the STUC to have dialogue with Scottish Government and the relevant trade union affiliates with a view to promoting the story of the International Brigade in our schools, colleges and universities. Having discussed this with the EIS delegation, we would absolutely invite that conversation. I think that's a really important thing to be taking place in our schools. When I last stood up to speak here, it was regarding the combating of fascism, and I'm going to reread part of my speech from there, copying my own homework somewhat. So, the trade union movement must be robust in fighting fascism wherever it raises its head. The fight against fascism sadly cannot be confined to a topic in history classes. I then went on to say, I encourage you to support this motion and continue the proud history of the trade union movement in fighting fascism. A key aspect of that proud history must be celebrating it. And it's celebrated by informing our young people, empowering our young people, and making them aware of the struggle and the challenge that trade unionists from these islands took when they made their journey over to Spain to fight fascism. They weren't just fighting fascism, but they were fighting for something too. The Spanish Republic, the Socialist Republic of Spain, was a forward-thinking, progressive, positive movement, and it was a key aspect, or should be a key aspect, of what our education focuses on. The choice of trade unionists to go to Spain and what they were defending and what they were fighting against. I encourage you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, delegates. We will now move to the vote. Motion 117, International Brigade Memorial Trust. General Council is recommending support. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? Any abstentions? No, that's unanimous. Thank you. I now call for amended motion 18, Free Orshalan, to be moved by Dundee Trade Union Council.
President, Congress, Stuart Fairweather, Dundee Trades Council, moving amended motion 188 according to the order paper I've got, but I will take leadership for Mike and all things. The motion is entitled Free Orshalan. I'm mindful of this afternoon's discussion and the STUC and the movement's relationship to internationalism. Our movement, the STUC, has long expressed its support for the Kurdish people. The specifics of this motion are to draw your attention to the leader of the Kurdish people. Abdullah Öcalan has been in prison now for 26 years. Desperately grabbed into prison against his will by the Turkish state. And the urgency that's around this motion is that for more than 3 years, Abdullah Öcalan has had no significant contact with the outside world. 3 years. No lawyer, no contact with his family, no contact with the movement. And the importance that Öcalan has for the Kurdish people can't be understated. He is emblematic of the movement, and that's why the Turkish state have taken the action that they have. Now, folk will know Turkey's a NATO state, and that NATO state is presently dropping bombs in settlements, Kurdish settlements, in Syria and Iraq. It's doing that, and it's imprisoning Kurdish political figures and Kurdish citizens. So, Congress, we should reiterate our call for the release of Abdullah Öcalan. But we should do that because the release of Öcalan is key to a peaceful solution in that part of the Middle East. Öcalan, despite his imprisonment, has focused on the needs of his people, has focused on the needs for Kurdish autonomy, and considers the solution to be one of democratic confederalism, something that the trade union movement would be good to study, do well to study, and well to consider. So what we should do is we should resolve to do a few things. We should say loud and clear to our guest this afternoon, Hamza Youssef, our First Minister, that we don't understand and we don't condone and we don't welcome his invitation to Erdogan, the President of Turkey. And what we should say to the UK government is we need to stop arms sales to Turkey, and we need to stop them now. And we say to the UK government, well, your pals, we are a folk in NATO, so tell your pals in NATO, stop dropping the bombs for Turkey on the Kurdish settlements, and stop doing that now. And we call on the UK government to use all its diplomatic abilities. They've got on Boy Cameron or whatever it is. Use all your diplomatic abilities to call for the release of Abdul Öcalan, and do it now. Comrades, we should take action. We should stand in support of the Kurdish people, but key to that needs to be the release of Abdul Öcalan. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart, for moving motion 118. Can I call for a seconder?
Thank you. Kenny Wallace, East Kilbride and South Lanarkshire Trade Council, second motion 118. Congress, we regret and are extremely concerned by the recent invitation extended by our First Minister welcoming Turkey's President Erdogan to Scotland. Our First Minister should not be engaging in direct dialogue with our country with such a right-wing, oppressive regime leader, whilst Turkey continues to be bombed, Kurdish settlements continue to be bombed. Erdogan's politics are diametrically opposed to Scotland's, and we should not be rolling out the red carpet. The trade union movement cannot support this invitation and oppose us in every sense. Erdogan's criminalisation of the Kurdish community for over 20 years and continual violations of human rights is an agenda Scotland cannot align with. Under the Erdogan regime, Kurdish communities have and continue to be targeted via a strategy that combines right-wing rhetoric, anti-Kurd aggression and oppression. This coming in the form of large-scale military campaigns in Syria, Iraq and Turkey, displacing and killing thousands of Kurds at the same time. Also, the suppression of any political opposition, where 150,000 opponents were detained under anti-terror laws. Detainees include mayors, MPs, journalists, lawyers and activists. He has overseen the erosion of judicial independence as well. The ongoing incarceration of Abdul Öcalan of the Kurdish Workers' Party and imprisonment of KES leaders such as Gono Erdin with no trial or verdict is another tactic deployed to quell suppression. Women's rights under Erdogan are also so poor. They face high levels of discrimination, femicide and arrest. These were further eroded by Turkey's withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention, a convention on action against violence against women and domestic violence. A dangerous precedent has been set here. Also, anti-trade union laws with poor recognition levels due to convoluted systems and strike bans in certain formats make proper worker representation nearly non-existent or compromise. Congress, we ask our First Minister to withdraw this invitation. Before Scotland extends a hand to Erdogan, Hamza Yusuf must push the UK government to end Erdogan's treatment of the Kurdish people, end the continual incarceration of political opponents like Öcalan, end the targeted action on the Kurdish community within and out with Turkey. Again, I reiterate, the trade union movement cannot support this invitation until these demands are met. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, comrade. Can't see anybody else, so we'll move to the vote. Amended motion 118, free Öcalan. Can I see all those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That looks unanimous from here. Now I'd like to call the mover of motion 119 on China, Irvine and North Ayrshire Trade Union Council.
President, it's just to give some information. The delegate from Irvine and North Ayrshire Trade Union Council is not able to be here. His wife's ill and he's not able to be here to move the motion. So the Trade Union Council would just like to, they've asked me to pass on a message to apologise for that.
Now the motion falls then, Arthur. That's all we can do. If they can't move it, the motion falls, which is a shame. But thanks for informing us. On your agenda, there is a space now for an international speaker. That was to be on the free Öcalan issue. We're still trying to secure somebody, so that rolls over, and we now have a Congress video on trade union councils.
The Trade Union Council brings together all the trade union branches within its area.
We're the main interface between the trade union movement and the wider community.
It's essentially an amalgamation of all the groups to try and make sure we're all working together to organise and make sure that people are supported and that they get a fair hearing about everything that's going on.
Lobbying the City Council and local politicians on issues that are of concern to local trade unionists.
I think the issues facing workers in Murray would be similar to a lot of places over Scotland. Budget cuts being a massive one, but also the just transition that is or isn't happening. We're seeing a transition happening, but it's not just.
We're dealing with cuts to council services. We're also really actively involved in campaigning, for example, in relation to the National Care Service Bill, to try and ensure that the National Care Service Bill is fit for purpose, unlike the current bill. And we also engage with a number of affiliates. We're very engaged with Scottish Palestine Solidarity.
We're also part of a local campaign against cuts in local authorities, and we have demonstrations and deputations to the City Council, and we're also campaigning about social care.
Aberdeen Trade Union Council is also key to organising our annual May Day March and also our annual St Andrew's Day March.
Asylum seekers were coming to the country and they had to be housed somewhere, and we got picked as somewhere to house them. But obviously we're speaking to STUC and we got Congress involved, and we took a motion last year to the STUC to actually get a day of action. What we did was we decided to put on a barbecue, decided to bring out obviously music, speeches, everything else.
Sing it loud and sing it clear, refugees are welcome here.
We were paid a visit by a far-right splinter group back in June, and we were tipped off to that, and with the help of the STUC and Stand Up to Racism, we mobilised around 200 people to oppose the far right in Elgin Town Centre. We had 200 people, most of which were local, compared to 8 of the far right, most of which were not local.
We're a big supporter of Scottish Palestine Solidarity in Aberdeen, and I'm a part of that, and we have been running demonstrations in support of Gaza and against the genocide in Gaza every Saturday, really promoting boycott, divestment and sanctions. And Aberdeen Trade Union Council has supported us all the way through with that, which is really, really important.
Glasgow May Day is a festival celebrating our city's workers, our stories, communities, shared histories, campaigning and resistance. This year's Glasgow May Day has a specific focus on internationalism and our role within the global workers' movement. We're creating spaces where we can learn from the organising and resistance of workers, of communities and movements who are often at the sharp end of challenging the current economic and political system. Political education has a crucial role to play in all our May Day activities, and there's an event for everyone this year, from book launches, talks, walking tours, a football tournament, film, music and art. Get along and spread the word.
Speak to your local branch. Your local trade union councils will have covered areas of organisations. Your local branch should know the trades councils that are covered by their members in the areas, and they can obviously then affiliate to their trade council, and that would then allow you to turn up as a delegate or a representative to the trades council.
We'll generally talk about workplace updates. We'll hear from from all the different people represented about the challenges they're facing in their workplace, and then move on to specific business items, things that probably cut across all workplaces or at least multiple workplaces, and come up for plans of action. So whether that is being out on Elgin High Street collecting signatures for the STUC Scotland Demands Better campaign, or whether it is organising against the far right, or whether it's, say, submitting an evidence submission to the Just Transition Inquiry, which is something else we did, that we try and be the voice of trade unions in Murray.
Having hybrid meetings means that we've been able to involve lots and lots of people in the broader trade union movement. It's been a big advantage.
It would be great if we got more people to come along as delegates, particularly young people. We're a very welcoming bunch. Everybody participates and everybody would be very, very welcoming. We love getting new blood in to give us new ideas, particularly from young people. So yeah, if you're at all interested, please come, please ask your branch to send you along.
Thank you very much indeed. Important issue there. We'll now move on to debate motions on the economy and industry, section 2 of the agenda. I now call on Composite B, Just Transition, covering motions 2 and 9 to be moved by the General Counsel. Speaker Richard Hardy.
President Conference, Richard Hardy from Prospect to move Composite B on behalf of the General Counsel. Colleagues, we meet here this week at a crucial time for the delivery of a just transition in Scotland. The Scottish Government has been recently criticised by the UK's Climate Change Committee for its failure to meet its own targets, and alarmingly by the Just Transition Commission, who have written to the Government clearly stating that the Scottish Government's plans and approach will not deliver a just transition for workers and their communities in Scotland. I don't need to remind delegates in this room that trade unions across Scotland have been at the forefront of campaigning on climate change and for a just transition. After all, we need no lessons on what an unjust transition looks like. We can see it in the communities that are still blighted by the closure of our pits, our steelworks and our shipyards, and which are now being threatened again by the attacks on the workers at Grangemouth. A just transition will not happen unless unions and their members are actively involved in the design of the policies which will impact their jobs and impact their communities. An example of the inability to deliver a just transition without greater worker control is the offshore training passport, which has been mentioned several occasions today. This is currently being stymied by a Denmark-based standards association which has no interest in the skills transfer required to deliver rapid energy transition. The much-delayed Energy Strategy and Just Transition Plan from the Scottish Government, likely to be published this summer, and the proposed Green Industrial Strategy are simply retreads of the same failing approach that the Independent Just Transition Commission has already said will fail to deliver a worker-focused just transition. And this is a body that's not just made up of trade unionists, but of representatives of business, academia and NGOs. Until the Scottish and UK governments prioritise energy efficiency upgrades and retrofitting through municipal-owned companies, unless the governments start to prioritise appropriate equity stakes in return for public investment, start to prioritise co-design and to deliver on their promises for cheaper and free public transport, then their strategies will simply deliver more wealth extraction. We demand an industrial strategy co-designed with local authorities and with the union movement that breaks with the failing models and rests on public investment and public intervention. Colleagues, last night many delegates heard from the workers directly impacted by the Grangemouth closures and their campaign that prioritises the livelihoods of workers and the vital role that those workers and their salaries play in the wider community. We also heard about their attempts to create a greener Grangemouth. I pay tribute to Unite and especially to the Grangemouth conveners for their work and their campaign. The crisis enveloping Grangemouth is emblematic of the current failing approach to just transition and net zero. It shows that our concerns are different to those of the bosses. It shows that we prioritise livelihoods, we prioritise communities, and we prioritise the planet. They prioritise profit and wealth extraction. But it's not just workers at Grangemouth that are being let down by failed models of industrial change. It's workers all across Scotland. It's workers at SGL Carbon in Muir of Ord or at CS Wind in Campbelltown. Instead of empowering those of us with the solutions and the desire for change, governments across the UK have looked for more ways to undermine our hard-won rights, desperately needed tax revenues and local democracy and control, epitomised by the policy that has created the Freeport system. What we need to see is Labour's publicly owned GB Energy, based here in Scotland, But we also must be aware that we will need to work and fight for this to be a meaningful solution, and not the ephemeral chimera that was promised by the Scottish Government of a publicly owned energy company and never delivered when they announced it in 2017. We need all governments to commit to genuine public investment, such as the Scottish National Investment Bank has largely failed to deliver. We need more public investment to bring more and more bus operations into public ownership, more public investment for our publicly owned rail and ferry companies. Colleagues, at some point in the next 9 months there will be a general election. We must, as a movement, demand the changes needed to deliver a just transition. 40 years on from the miners' strike, there must be no more communities left behind by industrial change. Conference, I move.
Thank you, Richard. Do we have a seconder for the composite? A formal seconder, please. Formally. No other speakers on this, right? I'll move to the vote. All those in favour of General Council Composite B, please show. Thank you. Any against? Nobody. Any abstentions? Can't see any abstentions. We now move on to motion number 6. First North Lanarkshire, then the world. To be moved by North Lanarkshire Trade Union Council.
I think we win with the best motion name this year. Drew Gilchrist, North Lanarkshire Trades Council. Congress Lanarkshire was at one point in the industrial heartland of Scotland. From coal to steel, Lanarkshire helped build Scotland's industrial trade unionism. We were the county of Keir Hardie and McMagahy. Like many working-class centres, we were devastated by deindustrialisation and driven into poverty by the lack of jobs in productive manufacturing. However, those communities struggled and survived the attacks against our class, relying on council services that were won through our movement's struggle: community centres, school buses, free school meals and social housing. As I mentioned yesterday, North Lanarkshire Trades Council has over the past year been building a grassroots movement of trade unions and community groups. The North Lanarkshire Council has begun cuts that will decimate education, transport and health, ultimately affecting workers from the workplace to the home. Comrades, our aim is to link the industrial and social struggles to a common political goal. Long term, that is the establishment of a socialist economy and workers' government. Short term is why we have brought this motion to Congress. Trades councils require the tools, information and support to build a local workers' movement against cuts that are completely politically motivated. The STUC tax report has allowed the Trades Council to hold to account Jim Logue and the Labour Council to show up the shady politicking around the budget passed earlier this year. So we ask comrades that again Congress gives us the tools we require to build our movement. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. We'll have a seconder, please.
If I may, just 2 seconds. Solidarity to the colleagues in Grangemouth. Thank you. Motion 6. President, Congress, supporting motion 6. All areas in Scotland have been affected by a range of cuts and threats of closures of many of our community centres, sports hall and other public buildings. We have paid for these areas with our taxes, but built by our forefathers. Our children have used these buildings so they have somewhere to go to socialise or swim, do sports. In my family alone, we have 3 granddaughters who go dancing at the from ages 5 to 12 in their town hall, a daughter who uses the school building for badminton, and 4 grandchildren, big family, 4 grandchildren, boys and girls from the age of 13 to 15 using the community hub as a youth centre. Even I've used the hospital rooms to meet up for Parkinson's meeting. Where will they go? Where will we all go if they close these places down? Some buildings, like libraries, are the only place where some of the elderly can go to read a book, be warm, feel safe and speak to somebody, probably the only person they'll see in that day. The health sector says stay fit, stay mobile, keep fit, swimming,
is good for you, your mental health, and you will help Parkinson's, reading to keep your brain healthy. Mine is gone, I think it's shot. But lo and behold, the councils are trying to close these down. The last thing we need is more cuts from the councils or the government. Cuts to our local communities is a death to communities. Communities that we grew up in, we have brought our children and grandchildren up in. We don't ask much, just somewhere safe for the children to play, the elderly to be warm and safe. But this seems to be all too much for the councils, especially when they do have the money and the fundings to keep these places open. Please support this motion for North Lanarkshire and the rest of the world.
On behalf of the world, I thank North Lanarkshire. We move to the vote. Can I see all those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? No, the world is definitely in favour of North Lanarkshire. Thank you. That's carried. We move on to motion 7, just transition, and invite Unite Scotland to move.
Thanks, President. Derek Thompson, Unite the Union, to move motion 7. Congress, on the 21st of November 2023, to the shock of many, Petro-Ineos announced the potential closure of the oil refinery and a transfer over to being an import terminal only. This announcement not only puts at risk thousands of highly skilled jobs, it threatens our energy security and will make Scotland the only oil-producing nation without its own refinery. Unite represents thousands of workers directly employed at the complex and thousands more in the wider supply chain. Over 2,000 people are directly employed at Grangemouth, including around 500 at the refinery, 450 in the Forties pipeline from the North Sea, and a further 1,000 in the Ineos petrochemicals business. According to Petro-Ineos itself, the oil refinery is responsible for 4% of Scotland's GDP and approximately 8% of its manufacturing base, and it made £107 million in profit last year. The complex is a primary supplier of aviation fuel for Scotland's main airports and a major supplier of petrol and diesel ground fuels across the Central Belt, and the site supplies 70% of the fuel to Scotland's filling stations, as well as Northern Ireland and Scotland. The focus for the future needs to be on creating the thousands of green jobs which are going to be central to any just transition. This means supporting domestic decarbonisation processes such as CO2 subsea storage. Unite does not support the policy to stop all exploration licences in the North Sea. We should continue looking at the exploration of new oil fields on a case-by-case basis, and it's crucial that we simultaneously decarbonise and reduce our reliance on imports. The potential closure does nothing to help that cause. Keir Starmer announced that a Labour government would deliver more than 50,000 new direct and indirect jobs in the renewable sector. The jobs promise came with a proposal to create a publicly owned energy company, Great British Energy. But we've been here before. Alex Salmond's pledged to make Scotland the Saudi Arabia of renewable energy. The SNP in 2010 promised 28,000 direct jobs in the offshore wind sector by 2020. This has never been the case. For the onshore wind sector, the picture was just as bleak, with only 3,300 jobs created in 2021. The first principle of our trade union is to protect our members' jobs, pay and conditions. There's been an abject failure by the Scottish Government to intervene and commit to protecting jobs as we transition over to greener and renewable energies. It's become clear the Scottish Government knew of this proposal months, if not years before announcement. As one civil servant said to me, we meet the company all the time. And it's difficult just to put into words how frustrated I am with discussions, or lack of discussions that have taken place with the UK and Scottish Government. The Cabinet Secretary, Mary McCallum, has, despite giving written assurances the Scottish Government supports the extension of the lifetime refinery, has yet to meet the workers, instead believing that the monthly meeting of 1 hour with the Grangemouth Future Industry Board is a means in which to consult on major issues. Her and Alistair Jack's response is to say that this is a commercial decision by Petro-Ineos, and the Scottish Government and the UK Government won't intervene. And it's quite staggering to think that when I met with Ineos management, they said to me that she's the best politician they've ever met. So that's a ringing endorsement of Mary McCallum when Petro-Ineos and Ineos and Jim Ratcliffe say you're the best politician in the room. Congress, no one in Unite is denying the need to decarbonise, but it cannot be done in a way throwing thousands of people into the scrap heap in the hope that something may or may not be around the corner. Believe me, we are years, if not decades, away from a sustainable renewables position. 90,000 people work directly in oil and gas and over 220,000 in the supply chain. Those workers, many of them union members, can't put warm words and hope on the dinner table for their families. The transition has to be led by workers and for the workers. They are the experts in their field, and believe me, they can tell you exactly what needs to be done to move away from fossil fuels, yet no one is bothering to ask them. The refinery is the first real test of this country's just transition process, and it's failing. I've asked Aris, I've asked Keir, I've asked Ed, show me where the green jobs are, but not one of them can put that on the table. Is a green job someone delivering your food on an electronic bike or a scooter? Because that's all I can see at this point in time. And our campaign is focused rightly on the refinery, but with more cuts being announced and other businesses in Grangemouth closing, we've now set up and launched our Keep Grangemouth Working. The refinery is Grangemouth. Generations have worked there, the community is built around it, and so is business. We cannot allow the workers to become the miners of our own generation. The debate must be around jobs and building a green manufacturing base in Scotland. Our campaign is clear. Extend the lifetime of the refinery so it can put a plan for new technology and keep jobs and energy security in place. Invest in new technology. The people and the skills are there in Grangemouth, and transition over to cleaner energy and make Grangemouth and Scotland the leading renewable energy place. And I'll finish in this Congress. We cannot wait for the politicians to give us a plan. We know what's needed. It's a worker-led transition. Unite will do exactly what it says on the tin. I'm unapologetic about that. We'll fight for every job, fight for the people, families and communities of Scotland and Grangemouth. We'll fight for Scotland to be a world-class leader in renewable energy. Solidarity to the workers of Grangemouth. Keep Grangemouth working.
Thank you. Can I call on a seconder? Formal? Thank you. The recommendation is to support. Can I move us to the vote? Can I see all those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That's carried. Colleagues, can I move us on to motion 8, charting a just transition, and can I invite Nautilus International to move the motion? Thank you.
Thanks. Chair, Congress, Helen Meldrum on behalf of Nautilus, moving motion 8 on charting a just transition. What's important about this motion is that it's not a debate on climate change or whether decarbonisation is needed. The science is there, we're in a climate emergency, and what this motion seeks to do is to make sure that the workers are not left behind. I hope that every trade union supports this, and in turn the workers we all represent. There's been resolutions at the UN and the IMO to deliver the 2023 strategy on reduction of greenhouse gases from ships, and I hope that this motion, once passed, gives direction on how we put workers front and centre. The ITF position paper that the motion commends sets out 8 principles that a just transition must improve workers' lives, and there must be these 8 principles, and that is to be ambitious, to be timely, to be democratic, safe, equitable, diverse and funded. And what do I mean by that? So workers must have a planet that is safe to live on. It must be timely. Shipping must pull its weight and commit to zero emissions by 2050. It must be democratic. Maritime workers must have a say on their future. It must improve seafarers' working lives, protecting jobs, working conditions and health and safety. It must be safe, support a health and safety first approach. It must be equitable. Training must be fully funded for all seafarers, with the cost not being borne by them. And it must be diverse, with the promotion of women and young workers. It must be funded. Public regulation and funding must drive decarbonisation. When we look at the emerging industries from the past, there's consensus that the trade union movement could have done better when it comes to oil and gas, on how big business was able to dictate how workers were organised or lack thereof, with a real lack of industrial policy, with the only real winners being the shareholders, while workers and communities have been left behind. This motion seeks to learn the lessons of the past and to have the trade union movement and our members at the forefront of those discussions. sitting at the tables of the decision makers, being meaningfully consulted on their future and ultimately being a part of that decision making in a truly tripartite operating model. Decarbonisation is a journey and workers must lead the way. The world of work is always changing. We must be there, ensuring those workers are properly organised, are equipped with the tools to make clear demands and to win, and to ensure that any changes in the world of work puts them first. That's what this motion seeks to do. When we talk about a full life cycle in the motion, it includes decommissioning, recycling, replacement and innovation, and cities like Dundee can find economic boons through decarbonisation in a way that sustainably supports the future of work and safeguards the future of our communities. It'd be remiss of me not to highlight the fight that the workers at Port Talbot community are in at the moment and how it's the biggest fight of the trade union movement. Because what happens in South Wales will set the tone on decarbonisation and its impact on workers. We cannot allow for industrial decline and stagnation to rip the hearts out of communities as businesses greenwash their way to higher profits on the back of government subsidised unemployment. First Minister told us today that his government will invest in a just transition to net zero, but just today the STUC have issued a press release along with some data exposing a £2 billion black hole in government funding to be able to deliver on green jobs, on ambitions, on commitments, and that Scotland could have 25,000 jobs if the political will matched the political rhetoric. We need a plan as set out in the motion to be able to guide the General Council to hold the government to account on those promises, for them to promote and support the work of those people who move the world, and to put them front and centre for those aims to be achieved. Support the workers, support the motion. I move.
Thank you, Delegate. Is there a seconder for the motion? Formally? Thank you. Are there any speakers in the debate? Can I move us to the vote? The recommendation from the General Council is to support. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. Can I now call on motion 10, Scotland, to be moved by Moray Trade Union Council? Can I see the mover? Thank you.
Good afternoon, David Blair, Murray Trade Union Council. So our motion 10 is about the ScotWind auction, and it calls for a full public inquiry to rectify this scandal. ScotWind was an auction of offshore wind rights carried out by Crown Estate Scotland, a devolved entity whose sole shareholder is the Scottish Government. The auction results were announced in January 22 with an additional clearing round shortly after. In total, 28.6 gigawatts of energy capacity options were sold for just £750 million. Now, for reference, 28 gigawatts is around 5 times the amount of electricity that Scotland has ever used at one time. This was a colossal sell-off of public assets. The auction bizarrely placed a price ceiling on bids. The maximum allowable bid was £100,000 per square kilometre. All but one lease area was bought at its maximum price ceiling. Similar auctions in both the UK and the USA in the same year did not have a maximum price ceiling and raised substantially more money per gigawatt of energy capacity. The RUK auction, for example, raised up to 40 times the monetary value per gigawatt compared with ScotWind. The price ceiling was set on the advice of Aurora Energy Research, a private consultancy who claim on their website that they provide private sector clients with an information edge for major investment through their, quote, close interaction with government. The Aurora report is full of holes, far too many to go into in this brief talk to Congress. But to give just one example, the report compares Scottish average cost scenarios with an English lowest case winning bid best case cost scenario. If it had compared like for like, the price ceiling would have been set at £1 million per square kilometre, and the entire auction could have raised £7.5 billion for public services and just transition investment in Scotland. We need to know why this price cap was accepted by Scottish ministers and who stood to benefit, because it certainly wasn't the workers and communities of Scotland. Aside from the price cap, the auction required those bidding to provide supply chain development statements. These were not scored or evaluated as part of the process for awarding auction rights, so far as we can see. The maximum financial penalty for failing to deliver on your local supply chain statement is set at £250,000. It's not even a rounding error, given the multi-billion-pound nature of these projects. The recent Mind the Gap report by the STUC has shown that green jobs are currently falling in Scotland as a proportion of spend, while they're rising in the rest of the UK. ScotWind should have been a major opportunity to raise funding for investment, retain a publicly owned equity stake in offshore wind, secure binding supply chain commitments to boost Scottish industry, and to promote trade union recognition in offshore renewables. Instead, it has raised a completely inadequate sum, much of which has already been spent by the Scottish Government to plug day-to-day spending gaps. Meanwhile, the supply chain statements are essentially unenforceable and rely almost entirely on the goodwill of major energy companies to deliver them. Last year in Murray councillors, including the SNP and Green councillors, unanimously passed a motion calling for an inquiry into the ScotWind auction process. This has so far been ignored by the Scottish Government and Crown Estate Scotland. The First Minister, who we heard from earlier, he promised in his leadership hustings that he would do better with any hypothetical ScotWind 2. However, his Energy Secretary has admitted there are no plans for any such auction due to the enormous amount of energy capacity that they auctioned off in the first and so far only round. It's therefore absolutely paramount that we have a full independent public inquiry looking at how maximum value can be extracted from the current process as the projects move beyond the options phase. This can be done, for example, through the planning system, through marine consenting, and most importantly, through the lease agreements that will be drawn up by Crown Estate Scotland. The process must be subject to full public inquiry and scrutiny, and it cannot be left to private consultancies to set rules in the interests in private capital. The stakes for Scotland are enormous. This is far too important to get wrong again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate. A seconder for the motion, Kate.
Thank you, Chair, Congress. Kate Ramsden from Aberdeen Trade Union Council, seconding this important motion from Murray TUC. The motion speaks for itself, and David's speech has given you the background to the ScotWind sell-off. As if it wasn't bad enough that the Scottish Government has sold off public assets, assets that belong to all of us, by the way, it's sold them at a knockdown price. So, instead of, say, protecting our public services or taking more children out of poverty, it's put money into the hands of big business to make their profits with, as it stands, no benefit to Scotland or to local communities. A friend of mine works in renewables. He works for a Scandinavian publicly owned company. He runs projects in this country for renewable companies that are publicly owned in France and China and other countries. They use trained workers from these other countries because the expertise apparently doesn't exist locally. They're using Scotland's natural resources, but very little of the resultant profits are coming back to Scotland. That's what's happened with ScotWind, and it needs to stop. We need to know what went wrong. Was it conspiracy or was it cock-up? So that our demands for a just transition from fossil fuels to renewables can be more than just a pipe dream. The Scottish Government needs to stop selling off our public assets at knockdown prices, or in fact at all. It needs to stop its practice of using private consultants that seem to be working for both sides in this case, by the way, at a cost of megabucks, a trend that's becoming more and more common, as those of us that follow the National Care Service Bill know only too well. We need to know how the ScotWind debacle has come about, but more importantly, how Scotland can still benefit from the current project. We're calling on the STUC to put their full weight behind the call for a public inquiry. Please support this motion.
Thanks, Kate. Any other speakers in the debate? No. Can I remind Congress the what are we again? Aye. General Council position is to support. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? That motion is carried. Can I keep us going and move to motion 11? I call on the GMB to move motion 11. Home heating plans, not bans. Thanks, Delegate.
Thomas Robertson, GMB Scotland, moving motion 11 and opposing the amendment. Conference, it has been largely bad news over the past year for workers in the Scotland energy sector and supply chains. The Scottish Government did announce £500 million of investment to anchor wind supply chains in Scotland, but this is long overdue, with Scotland decades behind. At SGL Carbon, celebrated by Scottish ministers as a success story of the just transition, announced 80 job losses amidst falling orders in offshore wind. Instead, contracts for manufacturing are going overseas and with goods brought in on diesel barges from free ports on the other side of the world. And most notably, the announcement from Petronas that they plan to end refining at Grangemouth by 2025 and the potential loss of hundreds of core and subcontracted jobs there, and also supply chain jobs in the North Sea. Not only would this move lead to redundancies and devastate the local area, it would undermine our energy security and sovereignty at a time of great global uncertainty. This was a wake-up call for all of Scotland, except for the Scottish Government, who have sought to implement bans across Scotland's housing stock without investment, supply chains or realism to make them work. This week, Scottish rural communities became aware of the fact that new homes will be banned from installing wood-burning stoves, a lifeline in rural homes where electricity supply can be unstable. To many, this may seem like a small oversight, but it is a stark example of the incompetence that runs through the Scottish Government's energy strategy. We now have to contend with their Heat and Buildings Bill, which will impact on every single home across Scotland. Each homeowner will be expected to meet a new building standard by 2023, and by 2045, reliable and affordable heating systems like gas boilers will have to be ripped out and replaced with systems like heat pumps, which are riddled with problems. Installing an average heat pump model will cost at least £10,500 after VAT. This is a cost that households, especially low-income households, cannot be expected to pay, even in part. If you can't afford them, the Scottish Government will force you into debt to cover costs for works you may not even want. They run on electricity, which is more expensive than gas in its current state. Scotland's electricity grid cannot deal with this level of demand without major upgrades. It also makes us overly reliant on one energy source, damaging energy security. For tenants, typically the lowest earners, landlords will be forced by 2028 to meet the new building standards, which they will then tack the cost of onto rents, further draining tenants' incomes and deepening the housing crisis. The Scottish Government have stated that £33 billion will be required to meet their net zero targets. The cost of installation alone makes these proposals unrealistic, so instead they want us to foot the bill individually. The Scottish Government should not and cannot ban its way to these targets. There must be a robust planned rollout of these measures in homes, fully funded by the Scottish Government at a cost to owners will pose major barrier to implementation. Home heating must be affordable, secure and progress us towards net zero. There is an alternative to this chaos. With the eventual growth of renewables and other technologies comes the opportunity for hydrogen. The existing gas network is already geared up to include a 20% hydrogen mix. Trials are underway here in Scotland to heat homes using 100% hydrogen. Producing this domestically would make that supply secure and sovereign. It would allow existing gas workforce to build their skills and utilise the existing gas infrastructure to heat homes with minimal disruption. Insulating homes must be a priority, which will reduce bills and emissions, starting with the lowest income areas who are bearing the brunt of the energy crisis. The responsibility and financing cannot fall to homeowners. It must be backed up with public investment and a planned rollout. The pursuit of net zero cannot be individualised. The cost of living crisis has forced more people to choose between heating and eating. Our ability to affordably and reliably heat our homes is too crucial to allow MSPs to play student politics with. If we do, the result will become cold homes, higher bills, redundancies across Scottish supply chains. Conference, support the motion and reject amendment. I move.
Thanks, Delegate. Can I call for a seconder for the motion? Motion 11. Formally. Thank you. Can I call on the mover of the amendment, Moray Trades Union Council, to move the amendment, and can I alert Congress that the General Council position is to support the amendment?
I think it's the last time you'll hear from me in Congress, so yeah. Yeah, we're just to say again, David Blair, Moray Trade Union Council, we're absolutely happy to support the principle of plans not bans. We thank GMB for bringing this motion. Completely agree with the criticism of Grangemouth refinery closure. Hydrogen will definitely have a place in the energy transition. We just had some technical concerns, particularly around heat pumps and hydrogen for home heating. There's a line in the motion about heat pumps being an untested technology. Our understanding is that that's not true. There's hundreds of millions in use around the world, many in climates colder than Scotland. And I can be corrected if wrong, but I believe there's a motion potentially going to GMB conference calling for more domestic manufacture of heat pumps. In terms of hydrogen for home heating, at the end of last year, there was a review published looking at independent studies, so those not funded by either the gas or electricity industries. And of 54 independent studies looking at the viability of 100% hydrogen for home heating, there were 54 that concluded it's not suitable and 0 that found it was suitable. The mover of the motion, just said there's a trial taking place in Scotland. That's fantastic. I just don't think we should be asked to preempt the results of that trial, which I feel some of the wording was leading us towards. There's issues with safety on hydrogen, about leakage, it being far more explosive than natural gas, and I assume all that will be part of the trial, but I think it's incumbent on us not to prejudge that. Just finally, again, I thank GMB for mentioning wood-burning stoves and off-grid homes, because in Moray we've got 25% of households that are not connected to the gas grid. In Highland it's 2/3, in the Western Isles it's 85%, and in the Northern Isles it's 100% not connected to the gas grid. So we just wanted to also make the point that there need to be not just hydrogen systems, there need to be appropriate systems that will work for the whole of Scotland. And not just those connected to the gas grid. Yeah, please do support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any speakers on the amendment? Can we have a seconder for the amendment? Formally, thank you. If there are no speakers on the amendment, do the GMB want right of reply before I move to the vote on the amendment?
Thomas Robertson, GMB Scotland, speaking in opposition to the amendment. Conference, the amendment would remove untested. An electric by default energy network through systems such as heat pump is untested at both an individual and collective level. It would completely undermine our energy security to put all of our eggs in one basket by relying solely on electricity, with heat pumps a core part of this plan. We are not aware of any other country which has done this. This would make our energy supply incredibly vulnerable. On an individual level, heat pumps untested in different home types such as Victorian tenemental properties, yes, they can work in homes purpose-built to accommodate them, but the Scottish Government's proposal are to force retrofitting changes onto homes where it may make heating more difficult and expensive to heat a home compared to using the existing gas network, a network which can be used for low and no carbon hydrogen. The amendment would remove the fact that heat pumps have a higher running cost, but they do. They rely on electricity, which costs more per unit. It would be unreasonable to force change and debts onto households in a cost of living crisis following 14 years of Tory rule and a global pandemic. Ultimately, the amendment is a wrecking amendment. The purpose of the motion is to give support to hydrogen as one of many sources to heat our homes. It does not say hydrogen should be the one and only source of energy we rely on. Heat pumps and electricity will and should play a role in our energy mix, which will make our energy secure. The UK's 280,000 kilometres existing gas grid net supports more than 24 million homes. We have an existing supply chain, a skilled workforce. It would be reckless to throw workers and the network on the scrap heap. to instead invest billions in costly heating systems when other low-carbon energy sources are available. Conference oppose the amendment and support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Congress, can I move you to the vote on the amendment? Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Any against? That's carried. Thank you. Are there any speakers on the amended motion? I'll move you to the amended motion. Can I see all those in favour? Please show. Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. Congress, can I now move to motion 12, supporting UK steel and our domestic defence steel capacity? Can I see the mover of the motion from community, and the General Council position is to support. Thank you.
Congress, Angela Carrigan proposing motion 12. DL Steelworks in Motherwell is Scotland's last plate mill. In 2018, I came to Congress to ask for your support in calling for a Scottish industrial strategy, joined up Scottish and UK supply chains for Scottish projects. 6 years down the line, and frustratingly, not much has changed. The current UK government's lack of interest in industry is clear after it shut down the Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy in February 23, showing industry is not important to them. At a time where there's so much turmoil across the world, our defence manufacturing capabilities in the spotlight, with disbelief that defence building contracts are being awarded outside the UK. How can this happen? Well, years of apathy by successive governments, that's how. Take our replacement submarines, currently being manufactured in Barrow from imported Navy Q1 grade steel plate. Up until the closure of Dwell and Clydebridge plants by Tata in 2015, we would have produced that plate through our quenching tempering facility. But even then, we needed to use imported slab from America and France, as the UK actually lost its ability to make Navy Q1 grade slab following the closure of Ravenscraig almost 30 years ago, with only minimum slab produced by Tata's Teesside Steelworks before HIT 2 was sold in 2011. We need both the UK and the Scottish governments to recognise current defence manufacturing as a strategic asset, with contractual obligations on third-party companies where relevant. As the last remaining ship-approved plate mill in the UK, surely from a logistical and environmental point of view, DL steel plate should be used where possible. Currently, the Type 26 frigates are under construction at BAE's facility in Govan, less than 30 miles from DL Steelworks, but the majority of the plates are imported from Sweden, over 1,500 miles away. Think of the financial and environmental costs, as our government obviously doesn't. All their Brexit promises went out the window when ministers did not insist on UK manufactured steel in the construction of the upcoming 3 fleet support ships, worth over £1.6 billion. Other countries understand the need for protecting their defence manufacturing. Just look at Spain, supporting their biggest shipbuilder, Navantia, who now ironically are part of the winning consortium tasked with building the UK's fleet support ships. We need a government willing to work in partnership with UK industrial manufacturers to keep defence capability within the UK by insisting on UK content where possible, by supporting research and development for the future, and crucially, maintaining capability between defence contracts by insisting on UK content within public sector projects. Time is running out. The UK government is not listening to this country's needs. They are happy to see the UK lose their ability to create new steel. With the impending closure of Tata's Port Talbot blast furnaces and British Steel's plans to close theirs in the next few years, we will lose our ability to make steel for any future ships, rendering us fully reliant on imported slab. Congress, for steelworkers, for our industrial heritage, and for the future of our defence manufacturing, please vote for this motion.
Thank you, Delegate. Do we have a seconder? Thank you.
Martin Will, GMB Scotland, seconding motion 12. Congress, much like the miners' strike of the 80s, the closure of Ravenscraig in Lanarkshire sticks in the mind of trade unionists as one of the most pivotal moments on Scottish trade union history. The closure of the L and Clyde Bridge, the remnants of the Lanarkshire steel industry, should be a wake-up call and spur action from government to protect a vital industry. GMB continually make the case for nuclear submarines and T-26 ships to be built in the UK. Now we are building them. We have the skills and the facilities, but building these vessels at home means that national security can be guaranteed. Just as we should protect and grow domestic shipbuilding, we should be doing the same for its supply chains. Steel is not just integral to shipbuilding, it is also integral to various other sectors like energy and construction. It is a material of strategic importance. In energy, we are seeing contract after contract go overseas for wind turbines. Instead of being built at yards like Methil, they are being brought in on diesel barges from free ports on the other side of the world. This is costing jobs. The global pandemic exposes countries' weaknesses in manufacturing, and global conflict is creating political and economic uncertainty. Countries are beginning to look inwards and strengthening their ability to manufacture key materials at home. It would be a grave mistake for us not to be able to produce a vital material like steel. The defence sector cannot become like the energy sector. We cannot rely on other countries to meet our needs for strategic assets or to safeguard our national security. We cannot rely on the free market to deliver an industrial strategy which will onshore jobs and build capacity. We need strong contractual obligations which mandate domestic manufacturing. We have to build it here at home. Congress, support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any speakers in the debate? Come forward. Thank you.
President, Congress, Ben Selby, Fire Brigade Union, speaking in opposition to motion 12. The FBU's anti-nuclear stance is long-standing. Our union has demonstrated against nuclear war as early as 1954 and later supported the campaign for nuclear disarmament, the CND, which was set up in 1958. In later decades, the union's stance against nuclear weapons was further strengthened by the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, in which firefighters responding to that incident in Ukraine were killed. We in the FBU want to make sure that British firefighters and the British public never have to face such appalling risks. In our view, this motion calls in essence to supply steel for nuclear submarines. Let's be clear. Nuclear weapons, when used, kill millions and millions of workers. They are used by one section of the ruling class against another section of the ruling class. Where the rich have nuclear bunkers, workers have only their lives to lose. Our commitment and campaigning against war must not just be lip service in this hall and demonstrations outside. Our international solidarity must build us to deliver on a commitment to ensure that no bombs are dropped on any worker in Palestine, Ukraine, Iraq, or anywhere for that matter. We must not allow our Congress here today to contradict itself. If we oppose bombs, if we oppose war, then we must not support the further production of the very machines that fire them. In our view, motion 110 from the STUC Black Workers Conference got this correct. And if you were going to support that motion, especially the penultimate bullet point, you cannot reasonably support this one. For us, it will be similar to the Fire Brigade Union calling for more fires and car accidents to increase the number of firefighters. We are making arguments for more firefighters, but not more fires. Our opposition is not an attack, though, on the workers in those industries, but we need to redirect this production to the industries of the future. Comrades know that in the 70s, workers at an arms company called Lucas Aerospace faced the threat of unemployment because of new technology and the recession. Those workers collated 150 ideas of alternative products they could build, and the Lucas Plan was born. It's time now that we develop our own Lucas Plan, a plan for a new democratic economy where the need to support growth in the steel industry is done through publicly owned steel production. Firefighters support steel workers, but we don't support steel being used for nuclear weapons and warships, as it's workers who will end up paying the ultimate price. Thank you. Solidarity.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any other speakers in the debate? Does the mover want right of reply? Before I move you to the vote, I'll remind you that the General Council's position is to support. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. Those against? Can I see it again, please? Can I see all those in favour?